Okay, so we had begun to talk about the many layers of magical thinking
Mm,
that people go to, including conspiracy theories.
mm,
And so the point about uh, those that are in a conspiracy theory, they're actually looking for simple answers to really complex questions.
mm,
Another example of that would be many Democrats who uh, will do anything to get rid of Trump, as well as a bunch of Republicans who call themselves never Trumpers.
mm,
And a whole lot of people think that they've really got to get rid of Trump because then things can begin to get better.
mm,
Guess they could get rid of Trump, but that does not necessarily mean things are going to get better.
mm.
And so that's the magic. The magic is we can do better than this by getting rid of Donald Trump. But all the Donald Trump voters are still in the U.S., suffering under their own set of delusions.
Mm.
And so um,
Yeah.
it's really complex, and people don't give it the value of the complexity of it all,
Mm,
thinking that they can boil it down to simple formulas, like, for instance, the law of karma, because that's the one where we spend so much of our time. There's several. One is the in and out, and the other one is whose fault is it or who did this mess, which is actually a way of looking out.
mm,
We have this time distinction between doing it now in order to get future rewards, or abstaining from doing bad now in order to not have to put up later with bad results.
mm,
And all the while, we then feel burdened by the karma that we carry from the past because it's going to kick us in the pants at any moment.
mm,
And so this whole belief system then that's wrapped up around the law of karma is all really about past and future and its relationship to the here now. So that's also a major change in magical thinking, is to get out of the past and future and get into that you live in a now. You do not live in the past and you don't live in the future. And so spending our time in the past and the future is generally going to lead to suffering because we're wanting things that we don't have.
mm,
And one of the things that people want so much that they have what they feel so little of is understanding. You see, doubt is a burden that people carry. We don't want to be in doubt. We want to be free from doubt, even if we still come to a state of okay not to know. At least that's freedom from the doubt that leads into the worry and the anxiety and the, the fear. It
mm.
goes right down to the bottom of what we don't know is terrifying, often more terrifying than the things that we know and we don't like.
Mm. Better the
And
devil you know than the devil you don't.
that's exactly that statement right there.
Mm,
That's exactly it. And in fact, what we don't know also drives technology in the sense of we know more and more about the outside world because we've been investigating, sometimes brilliantly, like with Newton and Einstein and a few others, the outside world, but that we haven't actually, though is possibly on the on in the cards of the future. Who knows that the same sort of scientific inquiries will be made into the mind, and
mm,
they're making some interesting stabs in that direction. One is to begin to control the chemicals within the brain.
mm.
controlling them directly from either an implant or from outside sources.
Mm.
In other words, let's have the chemical version of let's be happy
Mm.
without having to do all the hard work of figuring out how to manufacture the stuff through thoughts and feelings.
Mm.
Um, Sort of a medical version of, in a way, there has been a connection between mind and body all along. And so in the old days, the shaman, it didn't matter what the problem was. They were the one who was called, and it didn't matter what the problem was. They generally didn't have a clue. But at least they had some experience, and that gave them some clues. And so over a long, long period of time, medical science has actually improved to the point that they've doubled or more the lifespan of the human being on average, but we haven't yet begun to touch the that sense of well-being that we first started talking about. Do we have that we have an ill well-being sense, which is this is exactly what the Buddha was trying to address when he's talking about dukkha. This dukkha is a general sense of dissatisfaction that then leads into curiosity and doubt and all the way into fear if we do it ignorantly. But if we can come in touch with that dissatisfaction part, then we can do the things of anapanasati that are quite useful and beneficial to, let us say, mollify it in the moment. That we always experience these feelings and sensations of dissatisfaction in the moment, but then we will catalog them, remember them, put them on a ratio, and store them away so that we can rate new future experiences with this one. Okay, and so we have this system of not paying attention to what happens now, but rather always what's happening now is in reference to what's happened in the past. And so we never let ourselves be really presently here in the moment unless we have the skills developed to do that.
As a society, though, we're doing the exact opposite, aren't we? Because I think people now engage with the present moment, so they're much more likely to engage with it from a perspective of how can I present this present moment, this experience, and share it with a wider community. It takes you very far from this moment because it's how can I package this moment so that it can be seen by other people in a way that makes me look good. And that's the
Yes,
whole social
that whole world
media.
of selfies is a new aspect, a new aspect to the reality that we have been mostly missing out on anyway. Okay.
It's another way to mess up our relationship with the now.
A really, really interesting, clear, and recent situation has been various visits to the dentist office. And that watching the reaction of the other people sitting in the lobby, and you can tell they're not enjoying their present moment at all.
I don't imagine they are.
And no one in the dentist office is a joy maker.
Because they're already in the dentist chair. In their head, they've already put themselves there and imagining the
exactly with the fear of the future, even though the future may be 30 minutes off. And so they're already in pain,
Mm.
anticipating the pain. And so the opposite then of that is to engage the people with joy. I had a really, really long non-conversation with a little Thai girl over a pack of potato chips that she'd just gotten from 7-Eleven, down to begging and, oh, please give me. And she would hand it out like that and then back it away and felt like the big queen of the shop. And it got everybody's attention. In fact, Kitty was there too, and she kept interrupting me because she was a little bit jealous anyway, because she wanted me she wanted to give me some of her food so that I'd stop begging, but
Mm.
everybody knew that it was pretend anyway. Okay, so that takes a lot of the tension out of the air, is to be able to change the atmosphere like that. And children are often a really good example, or not an example, but let us say a vehicle or a tool
Mm-hmm.
to engage everyone.
Mm.
And in the dentist office, I think every dentist office needs not a clown, but a fat old happy man sitting.
You know, I'm definitely due a trip to the dentist. I'll bear this conversation in mind.
Yes, that's a good point. Is that if we can think about, oh well, let's do something to be here in the present moment, perhaps as we can engage other people.
Mm.
And so, if not, sitting quietly and not thinking about the dentist chair above all,
Mm.
is to make sure the thoughts of the dentist chair are are not present,
Mm.
so that uh, the time passes really pleasantly. And
Because
so
in
if we can then take that dentist office experience out into our whole life, we recognize, oh, there's all kinds of opportunities to be joyful
mm.
and to share that joy.
Mm.
However, the problem is, again, like in the dentist office, that everybody was worried about something that had not happened yet. And students at schools, they're constantly worried about things that have not happened. In that regard, they're all magical. This is all magical thinking. This based, oh no, things are like this now. That means they will be that way later. And they don't have that kind of control over the future. Nobody knows what the future is going to bring.
And yet we can create conditions that make certain eventualities possible, right? Like it's not like
Let us
there is
say
a
this. Let us talk about it this way. I would use the word trajectory.
mm.
Okay. An example of that, just, is maybe a non-Buddhist, and people will hate me because I'm using non-Buddhist examples, but just take the example of a gun.
Mm.
You can look at the gun and you can see which direction is pointed,
Mm-hmm.
where the barrel is pointed. Okay. That's a kind of wisdom right there, is to watch where that barrel is pointed. Is it dangerous, or is it in the air, or is it towards the ground, etc., like that? Just which direction it's pointed in. If we can do that with a gun, we can do that with all kinds of things.
Mm.
To see the trajectory, to see where things are going.
Mm. With an understanding, though, that manifest reality is such a complex thing that we can never.
Yes,
That
we may not be
yeah.
able to at any point in time pinpoint where that bullet is actually going to strike if the gun went off in the now. but we do know the general direction it's in, enough to get out of the way. And that's what wisdom is all about. And oh, so many thousands of examples, including don't walk down that particular dark alley. It just doesn't feel right. Or another one, don't chase a thief into an alley that you don't know. Because he may know it a lot better than you do and have friends there. So there's just so much things that we just automatically know. And that this kind of thing, in some ways, in the old days, was the job of the reptilian brain. And so in this regard, the reptilian brain is not sophisticated enough to deal with modern society, and yet people do try to live this society out in only automatic pilot mode or reptilian brain mode or gut feeling, living their lives in gut feeling, rather than looking at things to recognize there's really no danger here.
Often, what you're responding against is a story or a fabric, a misunderstanding you have about reality. So your fears are actually phantom.
Precisely. Now, here's a point about movies. All movies are magical stories, and that the job of the storyteller, using visual imagery and all kinds of techniques, then it's his job to make you live in that story, so that there's a you built into that, so that you choose who's the heroine, who's going to live, who's going to die, and then you are fulfilled if how you think things should be work out that way. But there's an entirely different way of looking at movies, and that is the way that another movie maker or producer will look at that movie in the sense of critical analysis. Do I see the shadow of boom mics or other trivia like that? Are their period costumes really period, or are they just merely costumes? There's a whole wide variety of things that can be done very quickly with a movie to tell the quality and the content of the movie with someone who has a sharp eye and know what they're looking for.
But in an ideal world, though, you want to be able to investigate reality at that kind of like critical level where you're not being fooled by it, but at the same time, you want to enjoy the story, right? Without kind of getting hooked into it. You want to enjoy the display. You want to enjoy it all without.
You'd
that's
be
a balance,
surprised
right?
at how few stories there really are, and it's actually just new versions of the same old story
Sure, yeah.
over and over and over again. Not just in movies, but in real life too. In fact, that whole sequence of events that we were talking about just now about a story is what Eric Berne labeled as playing games, playing psychological games that have beginnings and setups. It's sort of like three-card Monte almost, and you have to have a shill that's out in the crowd that's winning a lot of money in order to get the real target interested. And so it has this complexity to it that every movie has. You know, the example of boy meets girl, boy and girl don't get along, boy gets interested and then not, and then the girl gets interested or not. Meanwhile, there's a whole lot of action going on, and then the last scene is finally they're together.
Sounds familiar, yeah.
Well, and you can do that with Indiana Jones movies, or you can do that with visits to the symphony orchestra movies. It's the same plot. And so we can we can begin to see this. This is the question about wisdom or trajectory. We can begin to see how things are going because they, in humanity, fit general patterns. And those general patterns that we have can be thought of as in regard to the second noble truth or in regard to paticca samuppada. And when we understand that, oh, it's my feelings that run my life when I'm in automatic pilot, and it is wisdom that runs my life once I wake up and start watching what's going on, that I don't pay attention to the feelings anymore. I kind of shoot that savage beast and sort of put him out to pasture or use him as a wise ally. There's nothing that will indicate danger easier, quicker, and more accurately than a gut feeling of fear.
It's interesting though, this story, the kind of story aspect. You know, the last sort of 4 or 5 months, you know, I feel like you can use stories in a kind of positive way. You know, I don't know. In personal experience, the last few months, I feel like there is a certain amount of momentum in my life, which is allowing me to start to kind of change my relationship with the present moment and with reality, and in a very beneficial way. But I'm placing that within I'm creating a bit of a narrative out of that, so that when I have moments of sati, and when there are moments when I watch a kind of potentially a feeling that could potentially cause a chain of events that will lead to like me and other people suffering, I can go, I spot you. I can take a breath now. I can watch you pass and I can not react. And then there are maybe lots of other moments where I can spot that there's nothing much happening, and I can take a lot of pleasure in just the fact that, you know, I can see a certain thing and I can feel a certain thing, and a thought can pop into my head, and suddenly those events coming together with awareness can actually produce a lot of pleasure, whereas before they were just completely neutral or you weren't even aware of them. And I can place these events in a narrative, right? I can go, before, this is the way I reacted to things, and this was my level of awareness throughout the day, and this was how I felt when I woke up in the morning, and this is, you know, blah, 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 blah. And now there's a shift happening, and this is starting to happen, and this is starting to happen, and this is a trajectory, and this, I can turn it into a story which I feel allows me to spot those moments more because I'm placing it within that structure. So I feel like we can use narrative and story, like these fabrications, in a relatively skillful way.
Yes, exactly. Now, here is one of the things about those stories that when we're using the word story, another word we can use is the word conceptualization, or turning the experience now into a concept, as if we're now putting a dot so that we can help connect the dots, because we actually do connect things through experiences that have been conceptualized. And so what we're saying is I had this experience, and then I tell myself the story that I had this experience. And to now we've got something as a marker that can be remembered. That's how the superego works. Is by conceptualizing experience. And so we begin to make maps. Well, now here's the point is that you're making some brand new maps. The old ones you're not relying upon anymore. You're clearing the table and starting to draw new maps that are based upon new concepts, based upon new experiences. So in that regard, that's very wholesome. That's a very healthy thing to do, is to begin to change the habit patterns of the mind by bringing it into the level of storytelling and concepts. And you started that off with the question of, well, what about positive stories? The answer to that is there is no positive or negative. They're just stories. It's almost like, again, karma. Does the karma of storytelling lead to good or lead to bad result? Is it the result of the storytelling that defines whether it was a good story or a bad story? Just like the stock market, you invest money in the stock market goes up, that must have been a good investment. It was a good action, but if it goes down, then that was a bad investment. Okay. If we look at it like that, then the action itself and the value of the action itself is determined by the outcome that we associate with that, and that association may not be it may be too simplified and not nearly as robust as the reality of the situation that's built into that real cause and effect.
Something you said the other day, you talked about how the consequences can either be good, bad, or mixed, right? Probably 99% of them are mixed.
I should have said that.
Especially,
it's a string of nines with a point in there someplace.
Because even that positive, that story, I can see what you're saying. The stories are kind of empty of inherent value. Even that narrative I was describing to you, that trajectory, that that map that I'm sort of envisaging. I can see, for example, yesterday I suddenly came down with like a throat thing. So I've got like a little throat infection, and I was just aware of how and this happened 8 weeks ago when I got ill last. There's a thing about being a primary school teacher and having 2 young kids. You got infections coming at you from all directions. But I'm so aware of how my emotions change. Like when I get ill. Like there's a moment in illness, even if it's not a very serious illness, where suddenly it's like there's a flatness emotionally. And this happened when I got ill sort of over Christmas. I was like 5 or 6 days where I was very, very low. And it was after a period of feeling very optimistic, positive. And I suppose when those moments come, it's easy to kind of use that map that we had just discussed as something you can beat yourself up with. Kind of like, oh no, everything was great. I was on this great trajectory, and now I feel really low. This is terrible. I'm, backsliding, or you can use that narrative, which can be used skillfully, can very, very, very quickly be used in a very unhelpful way.
Right, precisely. Yeah. So you're making my point for me in that regard. Yeah. And there's quite a lot to be said about sometimes when people work out, they will put sandbags of 1 kilo or something, or maybe some wedlates that they strap to their ankles and strap to their wrists to make the workout more strenuous. Okay. So you can think of when the body becomes ill, that's like putting extra weight or extra baggage on there so that we can really pump up and get the sati going. And that way we can even look at getting sick as a benefit. That not only do I feel wonderful and that's marvelous, but when I feel like crap, that feels marvelous too. This is now an opportunity.
Intellectually, I get that. Like I get how, because ultimately, the insights of what the Buddha taught come from that reality, sickness, old age, and death. So it's
going to happen if you're lucky.
So whatever benefits are accrued through practice need to be able to hold up in that pressure cooker, right? Like they need to be able to serve you when those times come. I get that intellectually, but I find it For example, when I got ill at Christmas, the first day of the illness, like so fevery, shaking, like that, I loved it. I felt like I was putting my son to bed, and after he fell asleep, I just lay in bed next to him, like shivering with fever. But it felt marvelous. It felt like kind of peaty. It felt like some kind of like, intense, blissful energy kind of pulsing through the body. That lasted for a couple of days. And then when the fever kind of subsided and there was just kind of 4 days of just feeling shit and feeling really low mentally, emotionally, like that wasn't so much the case. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean, but here's part of what's going on. See if this fits for you. When one gets into that kind of a state, there's just not much energy. That the energy was kind of burned off with the feverish pity and the experience of the oncoming. And let us say, whatever efforts that the white blood cells were putting in, now they've pretty more or less lost the battle. And so there you are, laying defeated on the battlefield of the bed. And that defeatedness then is actually the psychological state that people get into far too often. Now we've become the victim, and the victim needs to hide. That's why we go to bed and lie down and try to take it easy like that. But the hiding from the illness, rather than confronting it directly, saying, I'm going to get over this. Up 2, 3, 4, let's join the mental army and at least get the mental part of the mind going, rather than having it lose the battle too. Now here's the secret part. When the mind is feeling like that, it's in retreat. And so the survival instinct goes into a kind of a shutdown mode, including shutting the body down, and guess what? Also shutting the breathing down. Now, if the person is also sick with something that has a side effect, or the primary is
respiratory.
When there's water in the lungs, fluid in the lungs, pneumonia is the word I'm looking for. When there is pneumonia, that means that the shallow breathing is not enough, because the lungs are already somewhat polluted with stuff that they can't get out of the lungs. Now, a normal cold will be like that to some degree also. And so in that regard, then, when we're sick, one of the really good things to do with the sati that we need to start building is to remember to take really good deep breaths. We need it now when the body is sick more than any other time. And yet the natural way that the body responds is to go into shutdown mode. So we have to go towards the wise thing to do, which is to get, and in fact, it may be quite tiresome. So we have to continue to remember to do it. Every few, let us say you can go about 3 breaths at a time, and then we quit. Well, let's remember again, and then do it again, and keep doing it every few minutes. And that this actually will clear up pneumonia. Why? Because the out breath is always really full of moisture. And so we're actually breathing out a lot of the moisture and cleaning out the lungs through that heavy out breath. And so when one is sick, deep breathing is really highly beneficial. And yet it's unnatural.
Because we get in that defeated mode. That makes sense. That does make sense. Yeah.
And so the change of attitude is, I can get over this. Let me breathe my way out of it. I can clean these lungs out. Let's do breathing exercises designed to clean things out.
Since also that the kind of understanding of the conditionality of things is very helpful as well, because you can realize, you know, there might be a kind of flatness to the mind, and instead of you taking that as a fixed reality, you're, you know, to be aware that it's something that has arisen because of certain conditions and that it will pass. And in the meantime, you might as well not act like a miserable bastard for the next few days, you know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So it's actually then the outcome of using sickness in that way is the outcome of the attitude now of really can do this. Really increases one's confidence.
Mm,
If you can cure yourself with anapanasati by getting yourself out of the blahs, every time you do that, it will gain you great strength to the
mm,
point that you recognize, oh man, I can handle anything now. There's nothing,
mm.
nobody can throw at me now. My mom could spit in my face, and that's just fine. You know, I'll get over that too.
Talking about the blahs and practice. So most of the time at the moment, my sits are, uh, you know, really exciting events. There's a lot, you know, there's a lot of, I mean, just since I've started speaking to you, the sitting practice really, it's become such a rewarding and rich part of the day, A, and B, it's also something which is the distinction between it and the other, you know, however many hours of the day, are the boundaries are becoming much more porous. And there are many, you know, there have been moments in the last couple of weeks. The last time we spoke, we talked about the kind of the awareness that of the cheetah and that kind of like empty vibratory sense of something, which, as we said,
Another way of saying it is that when you have the mind and body vibrantly alive, then it
yeah,
becomes vibrantly in tune with that universe that we are
yes,
normally out of tune with, that we can actually
yes,
bring ourselves up to the tingling vibrational level. That's is such a wow.
and that can happen on lots of different levels of the body mind. That it can happen in quite a kind of coarse emotional way, like with the PT, or it can happen in quite a kind of refined mode of perception of, like, you know, the proprioception. Like suddenly, like I'm feeling that sense of kind of like vast emptiness. It's like being felt in the sense of my hand in space. Like there's this like very fine sort of vibration in the kind of sense perception. And that's the same with the hearing, and it's the same with the kind of like luminous blackness in the kind of field of vision. And all of those senses seem to be sort of coming, and also in the mental space, and they all sort of seem to be coming together at points as well. And it's almost difficult to distinguish between a sensory impression, an auditory impression, and a visual impression, and a mental impression. It's like there's just this one field of this sort of high vibration. Anyway, there are times now where I'm like sort of contacting that in the day. So I'll be, you know, I was at a cafe yesterday morning with my kids, and it was just this really beautiful moment. There was sunlight coming in through the window. My children were kind of happily playing and reading on the sofa. Lots of just little noises around, thoughts coming, sense of one hand touching the other hand. And it just kind of all came together. And it was that open awareness, instead of kind of all of those things existed within this kind of expansive space. And it was just it was a lovely moment. And those moments,
You describe it well, better than I do, in fact. What a
well,
concept.
but yes, so this is the general run of things, is that this practice and uh this is what's happening with it. And then there are times, so for like every now and then, where the blahs happen, and I'm trying to have a much more, you know, less concrete sense of them. And I do mostly, you know, I'm like, I feel really flat, I feel really low. I know from my experience that actually a given week or a given day or a given 3 months will have those cycles, and that I need not turn this kind of low point into a narrative. I need not, multiply the bullshit by making a story about it.
Precisely. This is, in fact, right view or right noble view, in the sense that now you're investigating well enough, long enough, and gaining the wisdom that's underlying that by being able to collect the dots. So now you can see these cycles.
Mm-hmm.
In the old days, we'd hit a particular cycle and then we'd tell ourselves a story or a concept about it and then cling to that when the thing was, in fact, down here now. But now you're not telling yourself so many of the stories about it because you're actually seeing the ups and downs. That's excellent. Congratulations.
How should one practice in those down moments? So, for example, yesterday evening.
We just did that. We just talked about that.
Yeah.
First off, breathe.
Yeah.
And gladden the mind. So it's just anapanasati on steroids because you need it on steroids right now.
But you also have to be very, very compassionate, because the experience for me personally of sitting is very different when I'm in that place. Like there's a much more limited level of samadhi, like, the ability to kind of stay with something long enough in order to kind of get to any place of stillness or expansion.
Okay.
Tends to not really arise.
All right. So let's look at that word compassion, because that was what you used to predicate this last paragraph with.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What is compassion? Well, let's look at it as, for instance, possibly an antidote to something. What is compassion an antidote to?
Judgment, shame. It's like that critical judgment that goes, yeah, it's like the bit in, yeah.
Precisely. So what we're saying is that that's the stuff of the superego or the parent ego state, or our own attachments to rites, rules, and rituals, in this sense of how things should be.
Mm-hmm.
I should not be sick.
Mm-hmm.
And in my own daddy's words, is get up out of that bed and go to school. You're not sick. How many times did I hear that? Well, on the other side of the coin, my mother was a hypochondriac. We're talking about being torn. So, yes, there is that voice inside that's giving a should about it. And so that compassion then is an antidote to that. But let's look at it from the position of right noble view is an expansive view, and we're talking about expansive also over time, so that we can see the cycles of the mind, that we begin to experience the mind, watch the mind, and begin to catalog the various states that we see the mind in, and we can begin to see these things occurring in cycles and whatnot. And that the mind generally, when the body is sick, the mind behaves this way. And when the body feels really good, the mind feels this way. And when the body is full of anger, then the mind has these kind of thoughts. And when we're afraid of someone, then we have these kind of thoughts. Okay. And so there is a tremendous relationship between the body and the mind, where the body and the feelings associated with the body control the mind much more than we want to give it credit for. That you could say that that's really at the bottom level. That's the brain stem, or the deepest part of the reptilian brain. It's the part of the brain before it became reptilian. It's so ancient. Okay, and so that's at that core need of survival. And so that's why the survival then is in such shutdown mode. But if we're going to bring the frontal cortex in, we're not in shutdown survival mode anymore. We're in we got a job to do here, boys, mood.
So it's bringing in that quality of investigation. Is that what kind of brings in that prefrontal cortex? If we're talking seven
Exactly.
factors of awakening. Yeah.
You're exactly right. So that quality of we've got a job to do is let's look at what's going on. First off, let's make a complete diagnosis of the situation. Let's investigate. Let's understand the breathing. Let's understand the nature of the feelings. Where does it hurt? How does it hurt? If I do this, does it hurt? Or if I do that, does it hurt? Or can I bring to stop doing this and that? Can I bring it to the point that it's at least not hurting right now? And so we begin to experiment and play with the situation, knowing that we're kind of building up a library of things about ourselves that we really didn't know before because we didn't have the chance. In other words, it's really so hard to learn to practice correctly that we need ideal situations for it. But once we get skilled, we want to be able to put those skills in use when we need them most. And by doing so, those skills then become much stronger because they were put to the test. And this is just nature. This is just the way that life is. And so in that regard, then, going back to the issue of compassion and right investigation, we would do that in the classical sense of the word compassion is that when we see another person and we actually see the suffering therein, and that oftentimes what will happen is that we don't really see their suffering. We just get enough of it so that we feel bad too. I feel your pain. Let's please, folks, let's not try to feel their pain. Let's get it. Let's really examine it. Let's find out what's going on so that we can actually do something to help this person. Let's not give them what they say they want. Let's find out what they would really be delighted in having if they could think of it.
And actually, when you are going through a difficult time in your life, that's where the people who respond with that sort of curiosity about it, rather than taking your appearance at face value, that's actually the most, that's what feels best. It feels most compassionate. It feels like, yeah, I hear that. That makes sense.
Okay, so we can also begin to do that with ourselves. In that regard, then, investigation is your compassion. And if you were truly compassionate, that means that you do the investigation. So it goes in both directions.
It's interesting. Investigation normally has such a kind of the associations with the word are quite clinical, aren't they? But actually, an investigation that you're describing is actually a very sort of tender, compassionate process.
Precisely. I would call it becoming, in that regard, Sherlock Holmes the Buddha. Because he was the whole series of books that Conan Doyle did was to point out just merely observing things and putting two and two together. You oftentimes don't even have to touch anything in the room. You just observe what's going on in all of the objects of the room, and you could put a story together.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? He had Sherlock Holmes had some of the factors of awakening, but not others, because he was a very miserable character.
He couldn't turn it in. He didn't put it on the inside. It was all outside for him.
Yeah.
Scientists are like that, you know.
Yeah.
If the scientists had turned their science on their own selves, they'd be pretty happy scientists. Generally, they're a miserable lot. Same like preachers. So, that going back then to compassion and working with this awareness through the times when the body does not feel well is, like I said, think of it as strapping a little sandbag onto the arm. Now, in this case, because the body is sick, you don't have any choice about whether the sandbag is there or not. You do know that the sandbag will be there for a while and then it will be gone, but for right now it's there and you can't control that.
Well, there will come a certain point, won't there, when in all likelihood the sandbag will be there and we know that it's not going to go.
That's also part of the process of old
Yeah,
age, is when the
yeah.
sandbags don't go away.
They
They
just keep getting bigger.
right, accumulating, exactly. And can we trudge right along anyway?
Mm,
Even if the body is built has been over in osteoporosis, these old ladies can
mm,
still smile while they walk with a cane.
mm,
So um, it's always the attitude, and we know that the body is going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
mm,
That everyone will have old age, sickness, and death. In fact, my joke is that you're very lucky if you'll get very old and very sick,
mm,
because you're only because the unlucky ones die first.
mm,
And it's better to use sickness and old age as a tool for preparation for death.
mm.
Makes it very handy like that.
Focuses the mind, I'm sure.
Like the cowboy movie, nothing focuses the mind like a hanging gallows rope.
Sure.
And that's for the whole town. So, using then, what we're using is compassion, but we're labeling or we're looking at it from the perspective of right, noble view, in the sense of a thorough investigation. We can actually, because we're doing that investigation, we're interested, curious, and excited about that investigation. And so that also leads to pity. In other words, we actually enjoy this investigation.
Mm. That's been coming up actually a fair bit in my meditation in general, is say the kind of fourth tetrad part of the session, when within that kind of open awareness I'm allowing my attention to kind of go from trying to notice all of the information coming in and allow myself to kind of be in that flood, but mindfully and with awareness of as much as possible. That builds up a lot of, like, when that's happening, it seems to build a lot of pity with it.
That's what it's designed for. I mean, this is the
Mm,
process, and it builds up, or it cycles. Um, but it's hard to judge from one time to the next as to whether it's on a linear or a seesaw scale, or even those kind of things don't matter so much as what matters is, oh yeah, I've been here before. This is really nice. I know all about it.
mm,
Been here, done that. So that's much more of a good way to look at it, is that what we're doing right now is completely satisfying,
mm,
and that we don't have to judge it with other times.
mm.
Because if we do have peak experiences and then we register that as a goal to have, that's going to keep us from having that goal for a while.
I feel like that has definitely been a sort of historic tendency of mine, as someone who has in the past kind of craved peak experiences and sought them out, and actually sort of led me to quite a few extreme and unhealthy kind of places in my previous lives. I don't mean literally previous lives, I mean metaphorically previous lives. But I see metaphorical previous lives, as in, like, 7 years ago, 10 years ago. Although, 7 years ago, every cell in my body was different. Might as well talk about it as a
It
previous
is a
life.
new life. You're
Yeah,
completely different. There's almost nothing that's the same.
yeah. But yeah, I see that come up in the meditation. I've seen that, especially in the last 6 months, especially when the kind of PT started to arise. You know, I look back in my meditation journal to like October, and it's basically like the diaries of a PT addict. Do you know what I mean? Like these things come up in the meditation practice.
Well, that's good. Now you know that you have the tools to do that even while you're sick.
Yeah.
That you can actually lay there in bed knowing that the body feels yucky, but you're enjoying the heck out of it. With no place to go and nothing to do and all of those kind of words that, oh, this is so nice. It's okay to be sick. And enjoy it. Because you really don't have a choice about whether you're sick or not. So you might as well enjoy it. But that takes these skills of Anapanasati to really beef up. This is a workout. And recognize it as a workout, and also recognize that you're up to it. That you're up to this task, that you can do this.
It's funny. It's like my son had a really bad tummy bug in the summer for like a week, lots of diarrhea and vomiting. And it was such a like lesson to me, because when he was like on the toilet, when his stomach was cramping, when he was vomiting, he didn't love that. You could tell he didn't love it. 5 minutes later, the stomach cramp's gone. He's not sitting on the toilet anymore. He's not vomiting anymore. He was happy as anything because that bit's gone, and now he's sitting on the sofa with his dad playing. Do you know what I mean? Like, whereas we don't do that. 5 minutes later, most adults, you know, go, oh, it's so awful, I'm so ill, my goodness, I haven't been as ill, blah, 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 blah. And it's whereas
because we got to tell the story. We're so socialized that the stories we tell each other is more important than the actual event.
Yeah, but it was astonishing, like the level, the serenity with which he moved through this week, which for most adults would, you know, it's a week of vomiting and diarrhea is horrific, you know, to most conventional ways of saying it. It's an awful thing that people react to with great misery. And he was all right. You know, there were some bits that clearly he didn't enjoy, but there were lots of bits that he did.
Be careful, because he may learn from the adults how to do it the other way.
Yeah.
So this is actually quite an opportunity for you, is to use that from your son as well as what we're talking about here, and to say that I'm going to recognize when that illness has got me under, when it's on top, when I'm no longer the emperor of my pile of dirt is on top of me. Okay, that's when we have to start working with the sati and working with the breath to dig our way out of that. And when we're fairly good at it, we can dig it out just immediately. And then you go right back into it, and then we come right back out immediately. And so we begin to practice that way, so that every time that we catch ourselves feeling bad because I'm sick, then I can pull myself out. And we can begin to practice Anapanasati and get ourselves into a really nice state. So that's the practice.
Okay.
Doesn't matter if you're sick. Use that as an opportunity. Yeah. It's good practice. You're needed because you're going to get sick. If you're lucky.
Yeah.
And so this is a way of thinking about it, that this is just a good practice session. Let's practice well. Let's have insightful compassion to recognize what's going on, to see these cycles.
Okay. I like that. Insightful compassion is going to be my watchword for when either in a kind of like mental flatness or in that kind of physical sense of defeat in the face of illness or anything else.
or what some of the kids call you behind your back. That'll make a teacher
No.
sick sometimes too.
Oh, no. I think they like me.
Don't,
Who
no
knows, though?
guarantees.
No
No
guarantees.
guarantees.
Certainly not all the time. Certainly not all the time.
Yeah, like Murphy's Law, they'll take the right opportunity.
Mm.
They'll know when to zing you. So there's all kinds of times and places where we can really put this practice to good use,
Mm.
good skills to develop, to
Mm.
remember, and then to take the right effort to brighten the mind and take a deep breath and become the champion, the winner here, the right
Mm-hmm.
attitude.
All right, Dhammarato. Thank you so
And that's the
much.
very last thing that you'll ever do if you're lucky.
Mm.
As you're dying, you die in.
It's a nice, it's like a next level of sati to bring to it. Every time you kind of, sati kicks in and you take a breath and you relax into the present moment, if that can bring a little charge of, remember to do this right at the end.
Right. Hey, we're dying here.
Yeah, supercharge it.
Okay, well, we'll see you next time. We
Okay.
never did get around to what we got to do next, which is to finish off our dialogue between the Satipatthana Sutta and the Anapanasati Sutta. I think that there's still connections that we can make.
Yes. Yeah, there are still things I'm quite unclear about ways of approaching Dharma Nupassana from those two sort of perspectives. So yeah, definitely there's more to talk
Mhm.
about there.
Okay.
All
The
right.
easy way to look at it is the Satipatthana teaches you what to do, and the Anapanasati teaches you how to do it. And when you've got that straight, then you say, "Oh, now I've got it."
Okay. All right. Be well. Thank you.
Okay, see you. Bye bye.